Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's lecture. We're going to talk about the practicalities of the design process and how to contextualise a working portfolio. So the learning outcomes for today, what we're learning is who works in design studio, what their roles and responsibilities are, the components of the practical design process from client liaison to concept plans, how individuals within a design team work together to achieve and deliver a design proposal. Why we're learning this? We're doing this because we're trying to identify how the formative assessment of the module was implemented practically within a working environment, and trying to encourage you guys to work collaboratively and trying to resemble that industry environment and how people work together in a design studio. We're also trying to get you to think about your aspirational roles and interests with the industry, and hopefully get you to start thinking about what it is you want to do whenever you finish this course. So, we're going to start off with meeting the client. So when we go to meet a client as a garden designer, it's really important that we put our best foot forward, that we're trying to establish a relationship with these people, a professional relationship. So one of the first things we want to do is set the expectations from both our perspective as a designer, but also see what the expectations are of the client. What do they want you to do? What they're expecting? What are they? How far are they expecting their money to go? What they want from their money and what it's going to translate into. So we want to try and take lots of photos. This is the first time we've seen the site. We want to try and make sure that we get a good understanding of what they want, what we want to do with the space, lots of different photos, lots of different aspects. So when we go back to do some of our research on it, we've got loads of different references to make notes from. We want to establish what the client needs and what they want. And it's also quite important to distinguish the difference between these things that they actually need in this space, things that you need to include in your design, and things that they might want but might not be achievable, but it's something that they might want to get in there if it's possible. So you need to make sure you distinguish between those two, and make sure that you include the needs. And if you can include the wants, then that's great, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. How do they currently use this space? And how do they want to use the space? So it's very different. Those two things are very different. How they currently use the space, make sure you see, which areas of the garden they're using. Where do they like to spend the time in the evening? Where do they like to spend their time in the morning? And that's quite different from how they want to use this space. And it's your job to try and figure out what the relationship between those two are. Is what they're proposing, how they want to use the space, is that actually useful? They're actually going to use it that way? Is it actually possible? But it's your role as a designer to possibly highlight that what they want is possible, but actually it might not be the most effective way of using their space, or it might not be the most appropriate way of using their space. It's also really important that we set the time frame for completing our work. So it's trying to make sure that they have a good expectation and a good understanding of how long it's going to take us to do particular processes, and what kind of time frame can they see from now, from you visiting the site, actually having their brand new garden. For the purposes of this lecture, we're mainly focusing on the design proposal. So this is the bit where we're telling people what we want to do with their space and how we're going to do it. We're not actually promising anything yet, and we're not getting into the nitty-gritty details of how we do that. So we're also trying to communicate the stages of the design process as well. So what happens between now and them getting their super lovely garden, which is all finished and ready to use. So we'll cover that in the next couple of lectures. So we're also going to do a brief site analysis. At the end of the day, we're garden designers. We are not professional surveyors. You can hire surveyors to come in and do like anatomically correct drawings of your space, but at the end of the day, it's not our role to fulfill that. So we can draw. We can draw out the space, we can get rough drawings, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be precise, because we don't, unless you have like laser equipment and all the professional equipment to be able to survey something professionally, when I do this, I don't necessarily take on that responsibility. I get another surveyor to come in to do the to scale drawings and the plans of the site, of a basic site survey. So the boundaries, where the trees are, all that kind of stuff, because that will be more precise than I can do it. But what I will do with my site analysis is the immediate context. So what kind of neighbourhood is it in? I don't mean is it rough or is it nice or whatever. I mean, like, is it in a countryside neighbourhood? Are we in the depths of London? Are we on a street? Oh, actually, are we just surrounded by the countryside and we have no neighbours? That kind of stuff. What are the views like? Can we see out of the garden? Can people see into the garden? What we're looking at when we're standing in different places of the garden? What's the aspect? Where does the sun rise and where does it set within the context of this garden? What's the soil type? We can just do a basic soil test, so sticking our fingers in the soil, seeing if it's quite damp, if it's dry. What kind of plants are there already? That can give us a good indication of what kind of soil type we have. So if we have lots of drought tolerant species, we can see that actually maybe we don't get a lot of water in this garden. And we also want to see what the size of the site, also the size of the space. So does the client want the whole space doing, or are we just doing little bits of it? And so we can get a rough idea of size, so that can then help us to inform our preliminary quotes of when we're trying to tell our client how much different things are going to cost based on the area and square meterage of the site and everything like that. So the wider context is things like, where is the site? So that'd be things like, are we in the north of the country, the south of the country? Are we in a different country? And what's the heritage of the site? Where is it? Does it have is it in a super historic? Do we have a grade 2 listed house? Do we have a graded or listed buildings or gardens? That kind of stuff. User group analysis. This is all about the people who will be using the space. So maintenance wise, who's going to look after it? Are they going to have a gardening team? Are they going to do it? Therefore, the things that we put in there should be responding to that. Accessibility, do we have various accessibility needs? Circulation, how do people move around in this garden? How many circulation routes do we need? Think about things like how we get in and out of the space, as well as how we get in and out of the house into this garden. What's the function? What's the purpose of this garden? How do they want to use it? What do they want it to be? What's the maximum entertainment capacity? So how many people do they want in this space at one given time? And what current states of the site. So do they use the garden a lot? Are they not in it that much? There's no point in proposing some really grand designs if actually they don't use the garden that much. And who is the space for? Is it for them? Is it to entertain people? Is it for their grandchildren? These are all things that will inform your response. Context analysis, these are things like, how will the space be used? What's the relationship between the space and the user? What's the relationship between the space and the wider context? What's the relationship with the house and the architecture? And what's the relationship between hard and soft landscaping? So that's more of like, the context of the space rather than the site itself. So these are all things that we do when we're developing a design proposal. So this is the first bit of the design process. We're basically collecting all of our thoughts, doing lots of background research to be able to go back to the client and present to them ideas of what we would like to do. So we have our site and user group analysis, and we use that and we do lots of research to establish a brief, and then using the brief, we then figure out what our initial design concepts are, and then we put together a really nice little document called a design proposal, which basically presents to the client what we propose on doing. So this is some examples of what I do, and these are the things that I include in design proposal, things like mood boards, talking about like planting, hard landscaping, miscellaneous things. I also use visualizations and concept plans, as well as trying to get a preliminary quote in there so they can see how much this space is going to cost, and some ideas of timeframes or schedule of work and SOW. So these are some examples. Please take a minute here to pause on these pages so you can actually read the content that's on there. But here I just go through some of the sites and basically do a basic analysis and tell them what our aims of changing this space or what we want to do, using some mood boards. So I don't necessarily have time to get paid to do lots of visualizations at this point, which is why I use lots of inspirational imagery, and that's quite useful at telling clients, or clients find it a lot easier to visualize what we're proposing than just some 2D plans. Things like lighting, we can start thinking about lighting, what kind of things we want to put in there, how we want it to be lit up in the evening and during the day, doing an overall mood board just to show material palettes, and doing an overall planting palette as well. At this stage, we don't go into the nitty-gritty details because the client might turn around and say they don't like particular aspects. At this point, we're just trying to communicate what we're thinking, and they'll come back to us and say, yes, please, or no, thank you. So in terms of studio roles, I got you to think about that earlier. We're looking at things like people who work on the CAD side of things, people who work on the SketchUp side of things like hard landscaping and planting. Looking at all these roles, which one of these do you most resonate with, and which one of these would you be most interested in pursuing? Take a minute to think about these, and please bring your thoughts and your preferences to next week's lecture. What I want you guys to do in preparation for next week's lecture is have a look at this project. Please take a minute to pause the podcast here and actually digest the context and the site here. I want you to have a look at this garden village in St Austell, just outside of St Austell, and I want you to look at this site here in their back garden. And what I want you to do is start thinking about the site and the user group analysis. So if you can please use the table overleaf to do a bit of a site analysis, a user group analysis, a context analysis, and just start to collect some inspirational ideas and themes and case studies. And can you please bring all of these notes with you and any drawings or early sketches? If you could bring these to the face-to-face lecture, then we're going to do a bit of a group task together to develop this site.